All right, welcome to the Gateway API meeting for May 8th, 2023. We've got a pretty good agenda today. Please, as always, take some time to fill your name in the attendees list. And just a quick reminder, this is a Kubernetes meeting, which means it applies with the CNCF code of conduct applies. At a very high level, that just means to be nice to each other. It also means, at least in the case of Gateway API, that this agenda is intended to be open to anybody. So I think, especially with Shane not able to make it and present today, we have some extra time. So if you have the capability or something you want to discuss, please don't hesitate, especially triage if there's some PRs that we haven't been getting to, which I would believe because our PR list is longer than I'd like to admit. Please don't hesitate to add it to the triage section, and we'll make sure we go through it today. All right. So with that, first up, our next meeting time already covered, but for anyone who just joined, next meeting is more Europe and East Coast friendly time slot. So it should be updated on the SIG Network calendar. If you're not getting those invites, I suggest subscribing to the Kubernetes SIG Network mailing list, and then you should automatically get invites for these events. But in any case, we're looking at Tuesday morning Pacific time and afternoon, evening, Europe and elsewhere. Okay. Next up is the 070 release. This is absolutely top of mind. I put it to the top of the agenda intentionally. Let's see, I think this one may have already merged since I added it to the agenda. Yeah, so this is one of the big changes between RC1 and RC2. Thanks to John for catching and finding this one. We had not considered port in terms of validation, so that meant that some valid things were getting rejected by by our webhook validation. This takes that into account, so huge thanks to John for fixing that bug. And then the other thing that I want to highlight, and actually Gaurav, you've got one just below, maybe I'll just highlight this one, is Gaurav has been doing some great work on redirect. Sorry, that's the wrong one. And it's in a PR, but also it started with this proposal doc from Gaurav, and maybe I think Gaurav, you're on this call. Are you able to just give a high level explanation here?
Yeah. Sure.
And actually, before that, I should introduce Gaurav. Gaurav actually sits beside me. He's on the same team as me, and has been doing some really great work recently on Gateway OSS. So yeah, just welcome, and yeah, go ahead.
Hey, hi everyone. So the topic of discussion of this problem is it's quite simple. So given you are given an HTTP route and you're using a HTTP request redirect filters, the question here is what should the gateway redirect to given if you don't specify any redirect port, and how should that redirect port interact with whatever you specified in the scheme? For example, taking this use case, if you only specify the scheme as HTTPS and the incoming request was to an HTTP port, what among these three choices makes sense? So the first one is like you completely ignore the port because it is not present, because you did not configure it. The second one is you imply the port from the scheme which was configured in the redirect. And the third option is that you keep the port as it was in the initial request. So can you scroll down, Rob? Yeah, so the proposal is kind of considering both options 1 and 2, which is you can simply not specify any port at all in the outgoing request or in the redirect request. Or if you do intend to specify the port, it should match the well-known port for the scheme which was configured inside the redirect filter. The reason for allowing both of these options is for multiple implementations to be conformant, because I believe like some implementations may not be able to delete the port if it was specified in the incoming request. That is why it would be beneficial if both of these things are allowed. And then given below is just some examples of how what things are considered valid and what we consider as invalid. I can go over them, but if anyone has any questions, any thoughts regarding this, definitely we can discuss them right now.
Seems like John has a question on the doc there.
Yes, so the question is 8080 is the listener port, right? Not the host header. Yes, that is correct. 8080 is the listener port.
I'm muted, sorry. Maybe we can jump right into, definitely open to more conversation here. I'm missing some things and yeah,
I
vote
think
for.
I definitely would recommend that people go and read and think carefully about this. Thank you very much for this this truth table. I think this is probably the most important part of this doc. Like
Yep.
it sort of lays out pretty clearly what like all of the possible options and what the valid outcomes will be. And then once you understand that, then reviewing the going back over the PR is pretty straightforward.
Sure. So everyone, please do take a look and comment whatever your suggestions are over there.
Yeah. And then I think I don't know if it's linked from here out, but there's a pull request somewhere. Maybe I'll go over here that actually takes this the step further. And is this the one? Yeah, this is the one. Okay.
Yeah.
1880. I'll link this in the agenda because it's kind of the thing everything resolves around as far as this work. So essentially, let me see here. This is the one. So this is actually implementing the changes as they're proposed. It updates the spec and it does conformance tests. So the spec changes are here. Gaurav has very kindly split this out into 4 meaningful commits. So if you're looking to review just the spec changes, or if you're anyway, so it's well laid out that way. I encourage everyone to take a chance and review either the doc or this PR. But since it's already in the PR, it may be, I don't know, whatever's best to you. I think we'll just be keeping track of both of those. This is something that we're trying to get through as soon as possible. I mentioned it in Slack as well. Unfortunately, this had been labeled as a 070 release blocker and it got removed from the milestone. And so accidentally, and so unfortunately, well, fortunately we caught it before we released, but unfortunately this is sitting between us and RC2. So really appreciate expedited reviews on this. I would love to get something in this week. So I appreciate that, the code is here, the conformance tests are here. But I don't want to rush things. Like if there's something that is really, incompatible, or some portion of this does not make sense to someone, we can slow it down and have a bigger discussion. But yeah, please get your feedback in as soon as possible on this. Trying to move as quickly as possible because we all want to get 070 out the door. Yeah, any thoughts, comments? I've missed chat if anything's there.
I just wanted to say again, great work on the document, Gaurav. Yeah, like that document's really great. That truth table is excellent. It really helped me reviewing PR.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, this is yeah. Thanks again, Gaurav, for getting this out there. I know you signed up for Gaurav has signed up for a few things, and this at first seemed like, oh, this will just be an easy little thing, and you got release blocker, big discussion, design doc, all this stuff, and so thanks for rolling with it. Yeah. All right. Let me keep on moving then. Again, that's RC2. Those are the big things I'm aware of. If anyone is aware of anything else, don't hesitate to reach out. But as far as I know, those are the things between us and RC2. And RC2 historically has been the thing that is identical to our final release, and I'm sure hoping that'll be true this time too. Yeah, okay, so next steps, I think Arco, you're on this call. This is something that I remember there was, I think Arco pinged on this and I said, oh, we should discuss this at the next meeting. And I'm forgetting all the context now. So maybe Arco, if you can help fill in the gaps.
Sure.
Thanks.
So I did see a contributor, the community member, trying to change the conformance level for certificate refs from implementation specific to extended. So certificate refs, this sits on the listener. You can specify a list of certificates on the listener. And so supporting a list is implementation specific. Most implementations today only support one certificate ref. So I think the question here is, the two questions here is, does it make sense for the upstream API, Gateway API, to add extended support for this field? If so, what should the semantics be? I think for the latter part, I do see many data planes, HAProxy and Nginx Envoy. They do sort of have similar semantics for when multiple certs are provided. Selection is either done based on the SNI or based on the algorithm. So so now, yeah, is this something that we the upstream API should define, or should it leave it to implementations?
Oh yeah, thank you a bunch for that background. It is coming back to me now. I think like you're saying, we know that multiple certs on a gateway listener is a broadly supportable concept, and and so by that criteria, it's something like we should be trying to get to extended. The concern is just how specific should our spec be here when it comes to multiple certs, specifically when you have overlapping certs. That's my biggest concern is if you have two certs that have some form of overlap. Maybe they both specify the same SNI, or there's a wildcard involved in one. Not sure. And it sounds like, Arco, you've already done some initial digging into what common implementations support, and there's some similarities. The simplest possible next step would be just to say, well, you have to attach certificates in order, in the order they were received, to configure your data plane in that same order. And then everything else is implementation specific, but then that doesn't really, I'm not sure if that really meets the bar for extended, or if that really is just implementation specific.
It'd be pretty hard to write a test, a conformance test for it. And that's our bar for extended, is we have to be able to write a conformance test that we can run in the Gateway API conformance suite to be able to have something be extended. John put a comment in the chat about iterating on use cases. Arco, thanks for putting in a couple of use cases the Envoy Gateway has there. One of the ones that they have are firstly supporting RSA and elliptic curve certs on the same listener, which I think is a pretty fair one. And the other one is SNI based certificate selection, I think. So that's probably the one where it's most likely. That is lower down. There is two.
Yeah, I get that you use SNI, but I was curious, like, how a user would actually go about using that. Like, the case that made sense to me was just saying, like, hey, here's all my certificates I have 100 certs, go figure it out. And in my HTTP routes, I'll bind to host names and everything will kind of work its way out. But the issue there is, like, That almost feels like you want a label selector or something over secrets, not necessarily a big list of them. So I'm struggling to see like why a user should use this and how they should use it and how that compares to multiple listeners. Not to mention like some of the benefits of the listener model is that HTTP routes don't necessarily just have permission to bind to whatever host names they want in any namespaces. So there's some security concerns around our model. It would be nice to have some kind of example use cases lined out of why we want to do this. Like, I get the signature one totally. I'm only talking about the SNI one.
So if you could have a subdomain, right? And you could have a new app for that. And so if something's ephemeral, you could add the cert for that, add the route for it, define a wildcard host name at the listener level. You could define a more specific host at the route level and route to it.
Yeah, but why do that instead of just make multiple listeners?
Then
you would need to have either
yes,
wildcard cert or
you're still going to need. You're still if you want to have individual certs for each host name and have lots of HTTP routes bind to the same listener port, need to have edit permissions on the gateway to be able to edit the list of TLS certificate refs inside the listener. So you're still going to have to edit the gateway to have edit gateway permissions to be able to change the list of TLS certs. At which point you may as well be adding a separate listener for each one. I suppose you could make an argument about being concerned about the size of statuses and things like that, but like I think that's kicking the can a bit far down the road. You're 100% right, John. Like if you really want to, I suspect that most of the time the ways in which people are wanting to use this are all about making things more magic. That has certainly been a request that I've seen before, where people want to be able to say, I want people to be able to add HTTP routes to a gateway and have TLS certs generated, and have them not need to worry about the TLS certs, but also to have their HTTP route be able to attach to a gateway without them having to pick a specific listener, and but I also want to have distinct certs, not a wildcard cert. I have had people ask that sort of stuff before on Contour. And so those are the sorts of things that I'm thinking of. But I agree with you, John, that this is definitely a case where I think a use cases doc is probably the way to start to talk about this, because we can't.
Yeah, and I think that's a good use case
if we can't
that you mentioned. I just am not sure how this solves it. I mean, it might solve it. It's just not clearly laid out. So writing it would help.
Yeah. So I think to answer the question that's in the agenda, it feels like the next steps for this is a use cases doc to sort of say what are multiple certificate refs being used for. I think no one's denying ARCO that being able to specify the same SNI with multiple types of cert or multiple keys and that sort of detail, multiple ciphers is useful. But like, what are the other uses that we would like to hit? With SNI matching, like, what are we aiming to achieve by doing that? And that way we can all have this. This is one of those classic, we all need to make sure we're on the same page kind of discussions, I think, where we need to make sure that we're talking about the same sort of use cases so that we can talk about the sorts of performance tests we would need, because that's the criteria for moving on to extended. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It sounds like what I'm hearing is that this is probably, I think we initially said, well, we might not need a GEP for it. It sounds like, well, we probably do need a GEP or something resembling a GEP, even if it's a small one for this. Just because, anytime you're trying to discuss use cases and go through the, this process, GEP is really the process we have. This is a really tiny change, but just still, I think it's good to go through that.
Yeah, I think, and the other reason for the GEP there is to be able to record the, the use cases we've thought about and why we've designed it in the way, why we've made the decision we have, and all that sort of stuff, and record it all for posterity. Because I don't know about anyone else, but we definitely have enough gaps now that I'm starting to have trouble remembering why we made decisions and why things are the way they are. And that's only going to get worse.
For sure. Cool. Do we have anyone who can follow up with this? Arco, are you volunteering to push this forward? No
Rob
pressure.
with the army volunteer.
Yeah.
No, I think I've shared enough data. I'm hoping the contributor can take this forward. so.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. All right.
Sounds good to me too.
Yeah. All right. So we'll I can follow up after. I'll leave this one open. I can follow up and just summarize our conclusion here and see if they want to move forward. Cool. And thanks again, Arco, for pinging this one and bringing it back. I know we have a few too many PRs that are just kind of stuck waiting for a resolution. So I appreciate you following up, making sure we got back to it. Cool. All right. Next up, we already went through Gaurav's a bit earlier, so I think Mikhail, is this you? Yeah, are you on the call?
Yeah.
Cool.
Down
Okay.
the bottom, there's a comment down the bottom, Rob.
Thank you. Maybe do you have some more context you can share here?
Yeah. So last week I proposed like an update to the test to allow static mode, and so this week there's another proposal which is, I think it maybe it's much simpler than the previous one, but I think it can potentially allow supporting the static mode in test with a single gateway per gateway class. So I just wanted to run by you guys and see if if this can work. And so, and the idea of this proposal is to basically have before running the test, have a pool of gateway classes, each associated with a data plane. And as the test run, whenever the gateway is created, it is assigned to one gateway class from that pool. And when gateway is removed, that gateway class becomes free again. And I did a prototype of this approach, so it doesn't require any changes to the tests or manifests. It just requires in the prototype, I just allowed configuring this list of gateway classes that are available, and there is a logic in the common test code that allows that changes the manifests, the gateway manifest, by editing the gateway class. So I basically allowed to I think the most crucial change is apply.go here. Yeah, so basically, whenever the gateway resource is processed, allocating a gateway class for it, and then whenever the test finishes, deallocating that gateway class. And for the current mode where it doesn't change anything. So if you have only one gateway class, the tests run as they run now. But if you have multiple gateway classes, this will allow us to assign each gateway to one of the free gateway classes. Well, so I think I summarized the approach. So I wonder if you have questions or what you think.
Yeah, this is really interesting. If I'm understanding, and I may be misremembering what you were saying last week, but it sounds like every gateway class can support at most one gateway. Is that correct with your implementation? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that is not interesting.
Yeah, I think that at least Contour, and correct me if I'm wrong, Arco, maybe Envoy Gateway may have a problem with that. I think they can only accept a single gateway class at a time. And so like if you wanted to do the static gateway class, the static thing with them, then you're kind of you're kind of out of luck there because it's only a single gateway class. As you say, it'll end up with effectively being a dynamic gateway. I appreciate that you are working very hard to try and thread a very, very, very small needle. Yeah, but I think the more that I think about it, the more that I think that that we may be better off to move everybody towards you know, we may be better off to move to get that infrastructure, to get the infrastructure stuff sorted out, and then to move everybody towards being able to specify the infrastructure for the tests. So if we have the test, have a way where you can say, when you create gateways, here's what should be in the infrastructure stanza. And because then you can say the infrastructure stanza should contain its own parent ref that says use the settings from this gateway and merge the gateways in. That would then hit the static thing, but it would also, I should write up this up, so I'm sorry. I'm sort of just thinking this off the top of my head here, but the more I think about it, the more I feel like that should hit everybody's use case, but it's just not going to be achievable without without more work on the infrastructure stanza. Yeah, it's a really, I think it'll be much better in the longer term, but it's going to be a bit hard to get there.
Yeah, so basically, you know, define this in the API first, and then implement, you know, and then make the corresponding changes in the tests to support that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think can anyone correct me on if the infrastructure one merged or not? I can't remember.
I can't remember either. It may be
There are
waiting
so
on-
many. There's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
Like, that are all meshed together that are very close. John. Okay, thank you, John. Yes.
Okay,
John says
yeah.
not yet.
It is awfully
I can't remember
close.
which ones I can't remember which ones I have LGTM and which ones I have not.
Yeah. Yeah, that may be another one. If anyone feels like dropping that on the triage list, it might be good just to take another look at it.
I am
Cool.
pasting it in right now.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm interested in that idea and how it would work. I don't know. I mean, obviously the ideal I would love to get to is a world where every implementation could support multiple gateways, likely via some kind of operator sitting, you know, above it. That feels like kind of the end goal for the best possible API experience. I recognize that may not be practical everywhere, but I'm just, you know, I've been thinking as I've seen some very creative implementations on top of Gateway API, the idea of an operator that sits on top of Gateway API that can, you know, then deploy a set of Kubernetes resources that represent a gateway is actually something that feels like it could become generic and not tied to any specific vendor too. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but you know, again, I hate to see everyone doing the same thing different ways when it seems, at least from the outside looking in, like there's a lot of similarities. Yeah, I don't know again, in Mikhail's case, with yours, are you, you know, would each gateway be specific in cluster infrastructure? Or are you talking to, say, you know, out of cluster hardware, for example, or something else entirely?
Well, in our case, we run the data plane inside the cluster.
Yeah.
So like going further, you know, into the future, we can support, you know, provisioning it, just not at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So for now, I think some implementations out there have their own custom logic to kind of make conformance tests work for them. I don't know that I've seen anything quite like this, but I hate to see you be blocked indefinitely on this. I'd love to get something that makes it easy for you to run conformance tests. I think we just have to walk that, find that balance between this is a temporary workaround and maybe it's just unique to your implementation, and something that we're committing to long term as a standard. Because I think, at least from my perspective, the long-term goal would just be that anyone who's working with Gateway API doesn't need to worry about deploying a new, manually deploying a new gateway every time they set one up. Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, no, and I think that we'll have to define it in the API too. That specifically that the implementation must support more than one gateway. There probably might be a
Yeah.
limit, not necessarily, but
yeah, that's true. I don't think we have clearly stated that anywhere in the API as an expectation. That's kind of a North Star for me, but not clearly stated anywhere.
Yeah, I think that one's a good example of where the conformance tests kind of are exposing the implicit assumptions that we haven't written down properly.
Yeah. So I do think it's interesting to explore different ways, like using the infrastructure stanza, which should merge. Well, the gap at least should merge soon. But yeah, certainly I would encourage wherever possible to work on some kind of automation on top of this that does enable multiple gateways with the same class.
Yeah.
okay, well, thanks.
Cool. Thanks. And definitely, if you feel like just completely stuck and you can't run conformance tests without this, yeah, definitely check back in. Cool. All right. Next up, I think we've got Candace. Something about well, maybe Candace, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call. I
Awesome.
I put it in here before triage, but it can come after triage if you prefer. I don't know if we want to. I did
No,
come in
that's
after that. Okay.
perfect.
All right. So so this is the gap, and it was merged without implementation because we decided that we would do the implementation after everybody agrees on why we want to do this. And then the next step would be how we want to do this. I wanted to briefly discuss the object that we might want to use for holding this information, because the last 3 or 4 suggestions that came from Red Hat have been rejected. So I just kind of wanted to run it by everybody and see what's the preferred object that we want to go with in terms of the implementation. So if you scroll down, thanks for sharing the screen. If you scroll down to the prior art, which is down at the bottom, we did talk about how have the implementations done this so far in different implementations. And for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, we're talking about TLS from the gateway to the back end. Yeah, this is the picture that describes it, from the gateway to the back end. we will want to go forward before we start talking about implementation, about what kind of object or data structure do we want to associate this information with. And this, I see Kostin is talks about gamma, and even in the implementation, we're not going to be addressing gamma in this, I believe, as agreed upon.
Yeah, I think we've intentionally left that out of scope for this.
Yeah, I think Costa was talking about the previous.
Oh,
The
okay.
previous part.
Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the so I think it's a very reasonable question for you to ask for starters. For me, I would like, I think that something like that looks a little bit like the Istio destination will be great, but I would like to see it not using keying off hostname on the string level to represent the things. I think keying off hostname on the string level, if there's one thing that Ingress has shown us, is that keying off hostname on the string level for handling this sort of configuration is fraught with danger. And so that's sort of the reason why I would probably come down personally on the side of having some sort of meta resource on, like, binding to a service.
Can you talk a little bit more about why it was fraught with danger? Not sure I get the reference.
Yeah, so I mean, with Ingress, what ended up happening was that because you can specify any hostname, it kind of ends up with the Ingress. The Ingress is effectively claiming a global hostname using a namespace scoped resource. And so using so in the example that that's in the first one for the destination for Istio, I can't see, John or Costin, correct me if I'm wrong there, if destination rule is namespaced. I guess it probably is, but it references, it has the full spec domain name for the service it's talking about. Thanks, John. It is namespaced. It has the full host name, like service name.namespace.svc.cluster.local, and then yeah, I'm not saying it shouldn't be namespaced. I'm saying, but the problem is that when you have a string name, like when you have a string host name, you then have to specify the full host name to make it properly pick up which host name it should be associated with. Whereas when you don't actually need that information when you're connecting from a gateway to the back end. You don't need to know the host name that the gateway is connecting on. You've got that from the host name headers in the route or with other stuff, right? Like, so you just need the TLS stands, the traffic policy and TLS stands a bit out of the policy. So my opinion here is that it's better to connect whatever we do to be some sort of meta resource decorating a service, which in the new recently merged world of policy attachment counts as direct attach policy. It doesn't have to be called policy, but that is what the object will be. And this is all my my opinion. So
I would just clarify, well, I think clarify, but correct me if you don't agree, that's probably not just service, but anything that is a backend ref, right? Which could be service import or
yes, sorry, yes, you're 100% correct. Yes. Anything that's a valid backend ref. So service import, service, arbitrary other resource. And Costin says in the comments that the current style of the API is to use references to resources rather than names. And yes, I 100% agree.
Yep.
Okay.
So I guess, I was about to say, what does anyone else think? I shouldn't be the only one because that's gone wrong before.
I thought we tried to do this with policy attachment one time. Did we not?
I think we've tried every possible variation of this.
I think We did, but I think the previous one that we did, we left it a bit too open about what the thing would be covering. That was the back end policy. So we sort of said, oh yeah, it can handle all sorts of stuff. And people were like, but handling all sorts of stuff is really complicated, which is fair. So yeah.
So would it be fair to try to resurrect backend policy, but reduce the scope?
That's maybe. I have not had enough time to think about this. With any API design, there's always a balance, especially in Kubernetes, between too many tiny resources and one all-encompassing resource. Historically, when it came to backend anything, we have leaned towards one resource for all the things in our previous attempts, and that hasn't gone as well as any of us would have liked. I'm not, at the other side of it, I don't really want to have a separate resource for every tiny little thing. Like if you think of other config that could potentially be attached to a backend, and you say, well, every single one is a new resource, that's pretty awful too in terms of UX. I think what Costin said in chat is probably where I've been leaning as well, is that TLS itself is pretty complex and it's sensitive and potentially highly privileged. So in that sense, maybe it deserves its own resource. The way Kubernetes works today is you grant RBAC based on a resource. And so if you're saying, I want to configure all these things about a backend, maybe TLS is a special enough thing that it gets, a separate resource. This is me talking, off the top of my head, but I'm increasingly leaning towards a more targeted resource for backend TLS. We've tried and failed with the other approach. Maybe this will go better. Hopefully it will. And I know we absolutely all want to get this in, and having this be more targeted seems to give us better chances at success, and just not just that, but I think better access control long term. Okay.
So a service, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Have we talked about who can create this resource? Is it only the service producer, the service consumer, both of them?
So Rob, that crosses over into territory similar to what we're talking about with the reference grant. So ideally, in my mind, if it is going to be a decorator resource for any sort of object that is a valid backend ref, ideally you should only the people who read access to those resources should be able to create and use this resource. However, when we're talking CIDs, there's no way to do that. So in the language that was used to ask that question, it should be the producer, like the producer of the service is the one who's setting the TLS policy for connection, because this is explicitly about when the workload that the service is pointing to is running its own TLS, is handling its own TLS. This is not about when there is some other layer automatically managing TLS on behalf of the workload. This is when the workload has its own TLS that it is managing in whatever way it chooses, but it's when it is explicitly not when there's some infrastructure automatically managing TLS on, like, that is owned by the infrastructure, not by the application developer. So maybe the application developer has installed their own cert manager in their own namespace and is doing their own thing with that, but it's explicitly owned by the same person, by the application developer, not by the, not by the infrastructure team that normally owns the gateway.
Does that kind of imply that mutual TLS is not a goal here? Because you would think the
Yes.
consumer wants to specify which of their credentials to use, right?
Mutual TLS is not a goal here, I think. Didn't
So
we
by
say that already?
mutual TLS, if you're saying short period rotation things used to validate identities between services, mutual TLS is not a goal here. If you're saying being able to do client certificate validation from the gateway, then that is a goal, but it will not be included in this TLS backend policy because, as you say, that's a property of the gateway, not a property of the backend, right? Like the backend, the gateway will need to know about the CA it should be using, but if the gateway is to have a client cert, needs to have a client cert to connect to the backend, then there needs to be a different way to configure that. You can't configure the client cert that you need to connect to something in the serving where you configure the serving certs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your last sentence conclusion. So
Yeah.
Well said. I want to just jump back. I do want to time box this, but Brian left something like interesting in chat here that I think we kind of have not covered in this discussion at least. But it sounds like Nginx has their equivalent configuration to this in, their equivalent to a route. And that definitely would be an option here. And thanks, Brian, for linking to the docs. I don't know, Brian, if you want to talk a little bit about how that's worked for you. It looks like this is just an on-off Boolean.
Yeah, it's relatively simple. It's the way we just handle it in the upstream. So you get the certificate associated with it, and then it's whether or not we're basically enforcing whether we're testing for it. We treat MTLS as a separate thing because there's authentication implied with MTLS. So for us, that's a policy. This is a CRD model that for us has been around for a few years now. So Michael actually helped develop this, so he can probably speak to it a little more intelligently than I can.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks. I think yeah, this is where I was being extremely careful with my wording before, because this does get very confusing because a connection from a proxy to a backend that uses a client certificate for the proxy and connects to a serving certificate and a serving certificate on the backend is technically a mutual TLS transaction, and thus you could call it MTLS. But usually calling it MTLS can be slightly confusing because it's not usually, as you say, Brian, about the auth, and usually that's implied by MTLS. So yeah, I think that's a really great illustration of that. And the reason I was talking so carefully about it before is that one of the reasons that the previous one sort of was hard to talk about was because we didn't have the right language to sort of talk about that. Yeah, and so that's exactly what Costin is saying in chat. Is I have specifically been trying to avoid the use of the four-letter acronym MTLS because it means too many things to too many people.
Yeah.
And I prefer to use the more accurate, in this case, terminology of gateway client certificate checking.
Did we resolve the governance issue or the model that we want to pursue for this? Like if the person who provisioned the gateway has a conflict with the person who's describing the service, like the gateway wants to use one set of CAs and the service,
so
are we making some base assumption in terms of like they're the same domain for this proposal? Is that still something that we're going to discuss?
I think that Costa puts it pretty well in his most recent comment. Nothing can stop a server from asking for a cert in its handshake. So like I guess to me, when I've been thinking about this, the application developer, the service owner, the workload owner holds all the cards here. So that's why putting it on them makes the most sense to me. Sorry, Candice, you go. I talk too much.
Oh, no, that's okay. It is, I think what you're talking about, Boe, is a non-goal listed here.
I just want to make sure that we understand the domain of like control, I guess. Like, is this meant to be somehow there could be conflicting config and that's resolved, or that we state that that is not possible? Does that make sense? Because you can configure like the gateway to use a certain set of CAs, right? And then separately, you have a piece of configuration that might
Right now,
say
you
different.
can't. Right now, you cannot configure the gateway to use any CAs. So any CAs that you are configuring for the gateway are for listeners, not for gateway as client.
I see. So we're not, because that doesn't exist, we're trying to find for the client now, and then later on when we, if we ever get there, then there would be, it would be a separate API or it'd be an extension to this API.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
so
we've been
it would
saying-
probably not be an extension to this API. It will be an extension to some part of the backend reference to say, if you're doing TLS, then use this, then use this client cert or something like, or use this client cert, or you require this CA or something like that. Exactly how it works is going to be a little tricky. I think John has a good point in the comments to say like, we need like a bit of a table that summarizes a bunch of the variables here. And I think that's probably the way to go about it, is to have a table in there that specifies when you want to do this, where do you configure things, and is that built yet or is it not built yet?
Okay.
Good point.
Makes sense.
Good idea.
Cool. All right, well, I do want to time box this. This has been great discussion. Candace, I think you have lots of next steps here. Thank you so much for taking this on. Yeah, it seems like maybe we can add, anyone is welcome to do this, but this prior art section is great already. Probably worth adding Nginx to this. Maybe if someone from the Nginx team actually wants to contribute to this gap, I'm sure it would be welcome. Just describe how it works, and I think that applies to any implementation out there. If you support something like this, please go ahead and add it, just so we have a good view of the world and what's out there. And then at the same time, I think we've got some clear next steps. We do want to see this move forward pretty quickly, because it is very important to be able to represent this in the API. So really appreciate Candace pushing through, and yeah, we'll see where we go.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, next up, with just a couple minutes left, we've got 1868. This is the per gateway infrastructure. Thank you for adding this one. I think, John, I think everything is resolved now, or almost resolved.
Yeah, I think I've given my approval on there. I think it just needs an LGTM from you or Shane. Probably.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah, I LGTM'd. It's it's
Okay.
held. So if you are happy, you can LGTM and unhold.
Yeah.
Have a look
Cool.
over
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I know I've reviewed it recently and it seemed awfully close, so I'll take one more look. Thanks. And then
This one is
and
the next one that depends on that.
okay, the in cluster gate. Oh yes, this one. Is this one
You can
closed?
see from 108 comments. I think it's close-ish. It depends on infrastructure though. So we need to merge the infrastructure one first, and then I think it's the same.
Okay.
It's in a similar boat to another one which I have not linked, which is the network scope / reachability / routability gap.
Yeah.
So yeah, the main change here is
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
aside from the other PR merging, I think this one was ready to go, just pending review. So if not, let me know what you want me to do.
Cool. Just real quickly, is this Yeah, oh, it looks like this has already been removed, the suggestion.
Yeah,
that-
I removed that.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right, I'll make sure to take a look at that this week. And again, on both of those GEPs, this is one of the last chances to comment, you know, this in the next couple of days. So if you care about them, I recommend reviewing them ASAP because it sounds like they're both close to merging. Yeah, with that, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Thank you everyone for great feedback and great discussion. And we'll talk to everyone at a different time next week, early in the morning if you happen to be on the West Coast. Yeah, thanks everyone. See you.
See you.